Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have the pleasure to chair this session on Saudi Archeology Convention and wishing you enjoyable discussion and fruitful outcomes. I would like to direct the attention of the presenters that every presenter will be given 15 minutes to present his lecture or his paper, and would like direct attention also that all the presenters they should confine himself to the allotted time. After the discussion of the papers, the floor will be open for commentaries and discussion. And now, according to the program, the first speaker is Dr. Guillermo Rohmar, and the Sage archaeological project result of the first field season. Now I call upon him to approach the stage and to deliver his lecture. 15 minutes only will be allotted for him.
Thank you very much. Could we have the PowerPoint presentation on screen, please? Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to deliver this speech about the first campaign that Taj, on behalf of the whole team and especially on behalf of my partners, Ahmed Al-Jallad from Leiden University and Mahmoud Al-Hajiri from SCH Dammam, who lead this project with me. A few words about the site first. Taj is located some 90 kilometers west of the Gulf Coast and of the modern harbor of Al Jubail, and it is by far the largest pre-Islamic site known in Eastern Arabia. The site lies at the crossroads of two major caravan routes which connect South Arabia with Mesopotamia, as you can see on the slide here. So this positions Thaj as an ancient trade hub at the crossroads of South Arabia, Mesopotamia, and the Gulf. If we close up, the site lies on the southern edge of a large salt lake called Sabkha in Arabic, and it's composed of three main parts. Its most distinctive feature is a 40 hectares walled area in the shape of an irregular trapezoid surrounded by a massive fortification wall. The northern two-thirds of this walled area are now occupied by the 20th century village, but the southern third is protected by a metal fence set up by the Saudi authorities in the early 1980s. The second part of the site is a suburb, an extramural built-up area located to the southeast of the walled city, and it covers approximately 10 hectares. Finally, we have a huge necropolis of burial mounds, approximately 1,000, stretching all around the built-up area, except to the northwest where the Sabkha lies. So basically the necropolis is this crescent-shaped area all around the site here. So Thaj has been known to scholarship since the beginning of the 20th century, but it's not until 1968 that the first excavations were carried out at the site. In that year, Geoffrey Beebe opened a small stratigraphic sounding and excavated two tombs, which led him to date the main period of occupation of Thaj to the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. 15 years later, in 1983, larger-scale excavations were undertaken by the Saudi Department of Antiquities and the Free University of Berlin under the common supervision of Muhammad Gazdar and Daniel Potts. 5 areas were excavated, both inside and outside the city wall, and 4 to 5 occupational phases were identified, stretching from the 3rd century BC to the 1st or 2nd century AD. Eventually, the The third major step in the archaeological exploration of the site took place in 1998 when a Saudi team led by Abdul Hamid al-Hashash undertook the excavation of several burial mounds. The team first excavated the famous burial mound with an aristocratic burial of a 8 to 9 year old girl with fantastic burial offerings, including the famous golden mask and the famous golden glove. And then the team started to excavate other tombs, more modest, one of which yielded a collective burial of 19 individuals. So, as you can see, the excavations which were carried out at the site already provide critical information about Thaj, but they remain very limited in scale, and they give us only a tantalizing glimpse about the material culture, the economy, and the history of the site. So that's why in 2016, the Saudi Commission for Tourism and National Heritage prompted the creation of a new archaeological project co-led by Leiden University, Holland, and CNRS, France. The first field season of this project took place in October and November 2016, with a special emphasis on preliminary, non-invasive operations aiming at grasping the overall layout and organization of this huge site. So, among the first questions arising when one visits Thaj is how such a large ancient city could develop in a seemingly repulsive, very arid environment with less than 100 millimeters of rain per year. So in order to answer these questions, two geoarchaeologists, Tara Bozin and Cosmas Pavlopoulos, joined our team to launch a geoarchaeological study of the area. According to their results, the landscape of Thaj features table hills, as you can see on the slide, sand dunes, and large karst depressions occupied by salt flats or sabkhas. The table hills are residual landforms belonging to Neogene geological formation, which feature alternating beds of marl, sandstone, and limestone, as you can see on this picture, which is the side of the table hill. During the wet periods of the Miocene and the Pliocene, these formations were subject to intense karstic weathering, resulting in the formation of a karst network. And this karst network not only favors the quick infiltration of rainwater into the ground during episodes of rain, but it's also connected to a deeper, very large regional aquifer, the Raduma aquifer system. These particular geological features explain the presence of a permanent shallow water table, which can be found between 2.5 and 7 meters below the surface in the wells of Thaj. The second operation, which was carried out during our first field season, was a comprehensive photogrammetry coverage of the site using a UAV or drone. An area of 4 square kilometers was photographed and scanned, including the walled city, the southeastern suburb, and most of the necropolis area. In protected areas, archaeological remains appear very clearly on the aerial photographs, either directly, as you can see on the screen, or through differences in the color of the soil or in the vegetation. In order to complete this aerial documentation, we also carried out a geomagnetic survey of the northern and the southern thirds of the walled city, thanks to the help of Rosanne Elkantar and Paul Calou. The results of this geomagnetic survey were exceptionally clear, particularly concerning the street network in the southern third of the walled city. As you can see on the screen, there are really several main streets which come out very, very clearly. So if we combine the results of the aerial photography and the geophysics, we can obtain a fairly good picture of the last architectural stratum of the site. In the southern third of the walled city, the protected area, the city wall appears very clearly on the aerial pictures. As previous scholars already observed, this city wall is 4 to 4.5 meters thick, and it's built in the shape of an irregular trapezoid with diamond-shaped corner towers. Smaller projecting towers can be seen on the eastern section of the wall here, but also on the southern section, which was not known before. Previous scholars like Bibi and Potts insisted on the regularity of this fortification, but Based on this new documentation, this regularity shouldn't be exaggerated because both the length of the towers and the interval between these towers varies significantly. The most important new result concerning the fortification of Thaj is the identification of a gate. This gate is located in the eastern half of the southern city wall, about 175 meters from the southeastern corner. It is funnel-shaped with a maximum width of 3.20 meters. And though it's not very wide, this gate was probably quite important since it connected the main area, the main walled city, with the southeastern suburb. But we'll talk about this gate in more details later. Anyway, based on this new mapping of the wall of Thaj, a word should be said about its design. Daniel Potts has recently suggested that the city wall of Thaj owed its design to Greek polyascetics, notably to the theories of Philo of Byzantium. However, on closer scrutiny, nowhere in Philo's treaty do we find any advice to build quadrilateral city walls or even straight curtains. On the contrary, Philo advocates irregular traces, either slanting or indented or curved. Generally speaking, quadrilateral city walls are unusual in the Hellenistic tradition, although few examples can be found in northern Greece, in Macedonia, and in Central Asia. On the other hand, we have a very well documented tradition of rectangular city walls with projecting towers in Mesopotamia since the late 4th millennium BC, as shown by very famous examples, Habu Bakavira, Haradum, Dur-Sharukin, Borsippa, and of course Babylon. Therefore, in the case of Thaj, I think that it's not necessary to postulate a Greek influence on the design of the city wall. Mesopotamian antecedents are a closer and more likely origin. A second set of results concerns the inner layout of the city. In the southern third of the walled city, the architecture of the last stratum appears quite extensively, as you can see on the slide. This architecture is made of aggregated architectural blocks, most of which seem to be organized around a large central courtyard. The geophysical map brings out some main axes of circulation, most of which can be transferred onto the map of visible remains without inconsistency. These are the red lines on the map. So the overall impression, if you have a look at this map, is that of an irregular organic street network which is unrelated to the orientation of the city wall. But on closer scrutiny, the street network turns out not to be entirely random, since, as you can see, there are several long parallel streets which seem to form consistent groups. Actually, at least three coexisting patterns can be identified, as shown by the schematic map you can now see on the screen. So it seems that the final stratum of Thaj bears the imprint of several phases of urban development, and maybe urban planning, since we have in some spots orthogonal street networks. Finally, traces of massive stone architecture were also found outside the city wall, in the southeastern suburb. There, the blocks, the architectural blocks, seem to be less aggregated and to be significantly larger, with a surface comprised between 500 and 1,000 square meters. This may suggest that this area had a different function than the inner city. One may think, of course, of industrial activities, since such activities were usually located outside the city walls in antiquity. Trading activities can't be ruled out neither, since caravans would probably not have entered the city wall in ancient times. Besides, the plan of some very large buildings in the southwest, here for instance, with 4 rows of rooms surrounding a large central courtyard, may be reminiscent of markets or caravanserais. So in order to test this hypothesis, we opened a first excavation area in the southeastern suburb under the supervision of Damien Gazagne. A particularly large block, measuring 60 by 40 meters, was targeted. The eastern half of this block was stripped and 2 stratigraphic soundings were opened. The strip showed that the block is divided into 4 distinct architectural units set in a row from north to south. And each of these architectural units is organized around a central courtyard and covers between 150 and 200 square meters. The first sounding, opened in the southernmost architectural unit, revealed the existence of 5 occupational phases. So I won't describe all these phases in details, but we have here phase 2 corresponding to this thick layer of ash. And above phase 2, we have 2 major phases with built architecture, phase 4 and 5, which corresponds to the visible remains on the surface. Phase 2 was radiocarbon dated. It's our only chronological anchor for this sounding so far, and it was radiocarbon dated to the 1st century BC or 1st century AD. And the pottery from this phase may make it possible to close up the dating to the 1st century AD or early 2nd century AD. So the area was occupied at least from, let's say, the 1st century AD onward. Chronological anchors for the later phases were found in sounding 2, which was opened by our Saudi colleagues Azhar Toubi and Hassan Hamdoun in the northeastern corner of the block in architectural unit 4. There, 5 occupational phases were identified, but the sequence may be incomplete because the bedrock wasn't reached. The most important discovery in this area was that of a pottery kiln belonging to phase 4. This kiln featured a vertical firebox and a suspended floor. 3 radiocarbon samples from the combustion chamber, from the stoker's pit, and from an ash dump showed that this kiln was in existence during the 3rd century AD. And after the abandonment of this kiln, the area was once again reoccupied with very modest structures built over the dump of the kiln. So the excavations of Area 1 show that the southeastern suburb was indeed home to industrial activities such as pottery production. From a chronological point of view, they show that this industrial activity continued well into the 3rd century AD, and they provide evidence for even later human occupation. This is very interesting because, based on previous excavations, Thaj was generally thought to have been abandoned in the 1st or the 2nd century AD. So now we have evidence for 2 centuries of occupations more. So in addition to Area 1, excavations were also undertaken at the southeastern gate, Area 2. These excavations consisted in extensive surface stripping, which revealed the whole plan of the gate. And this strip revealed not only the gate, but a whole defensive system projecting towards the outside. 2 meters west from the gateway, we brought to light a 4.5 meters thick wall, which is perpendicular to the city wall and built exactly in the same way. This perpendicular wall, which you can see on the screen here, I don't know if you can see the cursor of the mouse, is 15 meters long, and it ends with a small bastion reinforced by 2 buttresses. So the idea that immediately springs to mind is that of a projecting fortification protecting the gate. Therefore, we looked for a symmetrical wall on the other side of the gateway, and we looked for an outer gate, and that's why we opened a trench just outside the metallic fence along the bastion. But unfortunately, this trench yielded only poor architectural remains unrelated to the fortification. On the other hand, we did some extra surface stripping here east of the gateway, and this revealed part of a wall which may be related to the gate complex and to the defensive system. But this remains to be investigated further. So, as you can see, the architecture of this gate deserves definitely further investigation, and that's why we made it a priority for our 2nd field season, which began 2 weeks ago. So I'm not going to anticipate too much on our results because the excavations are still ongoing, but we actually discovered since 2 weeks a much more complex architecture with reinforcements stuck to the city wall here and here. Yeah, I'm just concluding a few minutes. Reinforcements which were perhaps added to the city wall after a breach was made in it during an attack or something. So this makes a very thick city wall with a thickness of 7 or 8 meters, which is really exceptional, especially in the area. So just a few words about the origin of this defensive system, which doesn't find any parallels so far in the Hellenistic tradition, because the Hellenistic tradition tends to favor inner courtyard, working as airlocks. Defensive systems linked to gates and projecting towards the outside are not really well known in the Hellenistic tradition, but they find parallels in South Arabia, notably in Ma'in or in Khorkhori, as you can see on the screen. So basically, I think we have here a gate which, in the current state of knowledge, may be inspired by South Arabian models. So if we judge by the layout of the city wall and the layout of the gate, we find that the fortification of Thaj presents a mixture of Mesopotamian and South Arabian influences, which is not a surprise since Thaj is precisely located on the trade route between South Arabia and Mesopotamia. So I'll just stop here because I think the time's up. My colleague Ahmed Al-Jalad was supposed to talk about the inscriptions we found at the site. And unfortunately couldn't come, he had to postpone his arrival, so I'll just conclude by mentioning these inscriptions. We found 4 Hassaitic inscriptions and 3 Thamudic Sea inscriptions, which are the furthest east known Thamudic Sea inscriptions. Thank you for your attention, and sorry to have been a little longer than foreseen.
Thank you, Dr. Omar. Now the second speaker is Dr. Leila Nouma. Her paper entitled The Religious Landscape in Nabati and Hijra Madain Saleh from Archaeological and Epigraphic Source. You are welcome to give your talk. Please confine yourself to the allotted time, 15 minutes, that has been given by the platform.
Madain Saleh in northwest Arabia is one of the major Nabatean sites in the Arabian Peninsula. It corresponds to ancient Hijra in Nabatean, and of course Al-Hijr in Arabic. The surveys and excavations undertaken there since 2002 by the Madain Saleh Archaeological Project have shown that the main human occupation at the site extends from the mid-1st millennium BC to the mid-1st millennium AD. Before that, we know of a late Bronze Age tumulus dated to the end of the 3rd, early 2nd millennium BC, and after that, we know of early Arabic Islamic inscriptions, which will hopefully be systematically studied by Maher El-Moussa, who is a member of the team. No Islamic settlement was identified yet. Since the surveys and excavations began, the results obtained by the project are extremely numerous and can be quickly summarized as follows. The work of the team members have allowed to evidence a funerary tradition of the late Bronze Age proper to northwest Arabia, to determine the existence of a 52 hectares ancient city strongly urbanized and surrounded by a rampart built in the 1st century AD, determine the layout and chronology of the rampart, and to excavate fully one of the main gates which gave access to the city. Bring to light, in the area of the Jabal Ithlib, several banqueting installations which were used during the Nabatean period by the members of the Nabatean fraternal societies and which were abandoned in the early 2nd century AD, soon after the Roman annexation. Discover the southernmost Roman fort of the Roman Empire, about 500 kilometers south of the fort of Humayma in Jordan. Record hundreds of inscriptions written in Imperial Aramaic, Nabatean, Nabateo-Arabic, Greek, Dadanitic, and varieties of Thamudic. Discover in the area of the Roman fort and of the so-called Southeast Gate between 2014 and 2017 of an important group of Greek and Latin inscriptions which allow to reassess thoroughly the role and investment of Rome in these marginal areas of the Roman Empire after AD 106. Here is a beautiful painted one. Excavate the 5 Nabatean monumental tombs which have yielded a large quantity of human bones, leather, textiles, vegetal remains. These have allowed for the first time to reproduce a Nabatean funerary ritual from the death of the individual to his burial in the tomb. Finally, closing this non-exhaustive list, to excavate what is probably the largest Nabatean sanctuary at the site, which is the main subject of this contribution. It is located within the rampart of the ancient city and is known as IGN 132. It refers to a sandstone outcrop about 35 by 20 meters wide and large, above the surrounding ground 16 meters. Several rock-cut structures were visible around the outcrop, the top of which forms a platform which slopes up from north to south. Excavations on top and around this outcrop started in 2010 and continued until 2017 included. I will not enter in the detail of each sounding, but try to give an overview of the results and the provisional interpretation of the whole structure, of which I have never talked anywhere previously in a conference. So this is sort of first material. If one looks at the latest version of the plan, two elements appear immediately. The presence of a Terminus Wall, which clearly defines a sacred area, and the presence on top of the outcrop of a monumental structure, a paved tetrapylon surrounded by a wall built with white sandstone blocks. The latter certainly contrasted with the yellow color of the bedrock in the area. One has to imagine the effect produced by this monument when viewed from far away. It must have been a very conspicuous mark in the landscape, and it certainly caught people's attention. The excavation strategy was twofold: soundings and surface stripping. 8 soundings were opened, and a great part of the surface was stripped and cleaned in order to reveal the walls and what should now be recognized as a large Nabatean sanctuary. Here is what we can say about it and its chronology. I will present these phases phase by phase because we're doing archaeology, and so phasing is important. Phase 1 corresponds to the oldest religious structure identified so far, which is just a rock-cut niche in the form of a basin, which is possibly associated with a niche with a betel nearby. Both were hidden in phase 2A by this wall number 1, which is in pink, which has a terminus antiquem of the late 1st century BC. Since there is no indication of a door in this wall number 1, it is likely that it was built actually to hide the lower part of the rock face, either for religious or for purely aesthetic reasons. The 2 above-mentioned niches are therefore necessarily earlier than this wall, and they were thus carved before the end of the 1st century BC. It is likely that they have been built more or less contemporarily with the arrival of the Nabateans at Madain Saleh, which is now firmly dated on the basis of the excavations in other areas to the mid-second half of the 1st century BC. Phase 2B is the main Nabatean building phase of the sanctuary, and it is dated to the 1st century AD. On the basis of the dates given by the preliminary reading of the pottery by Caroline Durand and Yvonne Gerber, we can indeed assume the following sequence. One section of the Terminus Wall, which is number 16 on the PowerPoint, abuts wall number 1 and is therefore later than the late 1st century BC. Since wall 16 and wall 8 are joined, and since wall 8 continues with different numbers all around the area, we can assume that this surrounding wall, and therefore the area it defines, have a terminus postquem of the late 1st century BC. One should probably distinguish a subphase 2C, which corresponds to the building of several small rectangular rooms built at regular intervals outside the Terminus Wall. Their walls abut the Terminus walls and are therefore later, but possibly not much later. Phases 2B and 2C being probably 2 phases of the same big building program. To the same phase belong, on the basis of the pottery, the tetrapylon, built on top of the outcrop, and probably the original access to the sanctuary from the west. To it belong also a rock-cut basin and a cistern cut in the bedrock at the foot of the outcrop on the east. It is also presumably the case of the well dug at the foot of the crack which divides the outcrop in two parts. Finally, in the southeast corner of the Terminus Wall, excavations by Damien Gazagne have evidenced the presence in this area of 1st century AD structures. The very nice Ionic door jamb capital found fallen on the later threshold belongs to this phase, and it has parallels in Hegra proper in tombs which are dated to the interval between AD 25 and AD 75. What we have, therefore, in the Nabatean period is a large sanctuary, about 60 meters east-west and 45 meters north-south, surrounded by a terminus wall which defines a sacred area, the famous Mahramta, known from many Nabatean inscriptions. The earliest building phases of this sanctuary are dated to the end of the 1st century BC, and it was in use through the 1st century AD. It is composed of what we have named for the moment an upper temple with a tetrapylon and the enclosure wall around it, and a lower temple, the precise form of which is not known. There are no immediate parallels to this sanctuary. A few years ago, I drew a parallel between this and a structure from Petra, numbered Dalman 520, which shows a similar kind of arrangement. More generally, this sanctuary reflects the Nabatean taste for high places, for cults performed on the roofs of houses or temples. Examples of the integration of high places into sanctuaries are known, the most famous being the sanctuary of Khirbat Tanur, where the early phases in the late 2nd and 1st century BC are characterized by an altar in an enclosure associated with some roofs. After the Nabatean period, the sanctuary witnessed two more phases of occupations. One is Roman, and which is not very much visible in terms of architecture, but which is very well seen in the occupation layers which have been excavated in the many soundings we made. And the last phase of occupation, where there's an architectural decoration belonging to this Roman phase with these blocks which have been found with diagonal or triangular decoration, for which we have found no parallels, but which were probably locally made. And the last phase has a terminus postquem of AD 270, and it is probable that the whole area was still protected by the terminus wall, and that people just came and start dwelling in the area of the former Nabatean sanctuary. At the end of this archaeological presentation, I need to say a few words about the deity or deities worshipped in this sanctuary. The objects put to light during the excavations, among which a stone incense burner, a complete bronze casket, probably used for cosmetics, a small bronze eagle, a votive offering, do not reveal the identity of this deity or deities. Some time ago, I suggested that it was dedicated to the cult of the sun god. This was based on the fact that the platform on top of the tetrapylon is almost exactly orientated to the south, which means that from there, and one can see it when one is excavating, when looking south, one can follow completely the daily path of the sun. It was also based, this assumption, on Strabo's text from geography, who says that the Nabateans, quote, worship the sun, building an altar on top of the house and pouring libations on it daily and burning frankincense. The top of IGN 132 would indeed be an ideal place to worship the sun. More recently, during the excavations undertaken by Maher al-Musa in the residential unit to the southwest of IGN 132, you have the location in the lower left part of the slide, an interesting discovery was made. Two ashlars reused in the stone substructure of a wall bear graffiti. One block bears 4, while the second only 1. According to Maher al-Musa, this wall belongs to the first building phase identified in this area. and is probably dated to the 1st century AD. One of the graffiti says, "May Fulan, son of Fulan, be safe in the presence of or before heaven." And the expression contained, which is min qadam, in the presence of, is widely attested in Nabatean and most often is followed by one or two divine names. And you have example of this on the screen right now. Min qadam dushara, dushara wa tabush, dushara wa ubadat, etc. Finally, the expression min qadam shamayya itself, which is the same as in the new inscription, occurs in one inscription from Hegra, CIS 236, discovered by Charles Doughty a long time ago in the Jebel Ithlib, and correctly read by Joseph Milik much later, and I found it when I was doing the survey in the year 2000. It says, "Good remembrance to Zaidu, son of Gad Tab, son of Zaidu, in the presence of heaven." Aramaic Shamayya is usually translated heaven, God, most probably some supreme divine figure. In the Nabatean inscriptions where it occurs, it is preceded by min qadam, and it is therefore very likely that it, that it has this meaning in Nabatean as well. We thus now have two attestations of a god of heaven in Nabatean, and they both come from Hegra. So there's still a lot to say about it, but this is another story. I have said that this new text is reused in the masonry of a building which was very close to the sanctuary. The monument from which it originally came from was probably not very far from the place where it was reused, and one might be tempted to consider that Shamayya was at home in this area of the old city, and therefore that Shamayya was one way or the other connected with the sanctuary IGN 132. Of course, this graffito may also have no connection at all with the sanctuary, and its presence around be a pure coincidence. But I don't believe in coincidence. Although further research is needed to both to reveal more of the internal structure of the sanctuary, its chronology, and the function of some of the rooms, the excavations undertaken so far have transformed what looked like a poorly preserved sandstone outcrop in the middle of the residential area of Madain Saleh, or ancient Hegra, into what was probably the main sanctuary of the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Norman. Now the turn is for Dr. Caroline Durand. The paper is entitled New Investigation on the Pre-Islamic Pottery from Eastern Arabia, Preliminary Result from the first season of the Saudi-Dutch-French project inside. Now you can give your talk. 15 minutes is allotted for you.
Good morning, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Yes. So I'm going to talk about the site of Thaj again. Dr. Jérôme Romer just presented before the main results of the first campaign last year. And I will focus now on the preliminary results regarding the pottery material found during this campaign. So here is a map, Okay, here is the map of the site with the different locations of the previous archaeological programs undertaken on this site. And these former programs resulted in a few preliminary studies about the pottery, especially about the local pottery. The main study up till now was published by Daniel Potts in 1993. And it was based on a deep sounding excavated inside the rampart in the southeastern area of the city. Regarding the pottery material, this was more or less the situation when we started the new Saudi-Dutch-French excavation program in November 2016. So, I show you again the two newly excavated areas. So Area 1, which is located outside of the rampart and consists in 4 architectural units built in a row. And Area 2, which correspond to one of the rampart gates. Both areas yielded a large amount of pottery, and I will focus now mainly on the pottery coming from Area 1. In one of these units, as Jérôme also presented before, we found a pottery kiln. And this pottery kiln still needs a lot of investigations, but what we can say already, thanks to a C14 analysis, is that it seems to stop being utilized between the late 3rd and the 4th century AD. In this area, we found many pottery wasters and overfired pottery fragments. And all this material will be studied in priority during the second campaign, which is ongoing now. Also in Area 1, a deep sanding was undertaken in one of the rooms of the southern architectural unit. I show you again this nice picture of the stratigraphy, the deep stratigraphy. So half of the room was excavated until the bedrock, in order to complete complete stratigraphy for the occupation of this area of the site. And based on this stratigraphy, 5 different occupation phases have been recognized by the excavator, Damien Gazagne. Oops. And I show you here an overview of the pottery coming from these 5 different phases. The main issue, of course, was to obtain a first time range, a first chronology for this trench. So we had some indication that could help us. So first, the C14 analysis from the kiln, that should be more or less contemporary to the phase 4. Sorry, there is a mistake here, but it's actually the phase 4. And a second C14 analysis coming from phase 2, and that should be dated somewhere between the late 1st century BC and the early 2nd century AD. So don't worry, I will not describe every single sherd, but I will concentrate now on the diagnostic and the characteristic elements of this pottery sequence. First, we found many fragments of commonware, which corresponds most probably to a local production. This commonware is characterized by its reddish to reddish-brown fabric. Sometimes it's grayish when it's overfired. And it has a sandy texture with small mineral inclusions, and usually the pots are covered by a whitish slip. So most of these pots, you don't see very well probably on the slide, but they show traces of fire. And it seems that this type of vessels were with a globular body and short everted triangular rim were used for cooking. Besides, we also found some vessel with a similar fabric, but with different types of profile and with a very characteristic incised decoration. In Taj, we have this recurrent pattern of shark teeth line, incised shark teeth line, and it seems to be very typical for the Taj area. It can be found on the body of some cooking pots. You can see it on the top, and on the neck of jars. And we found it in the late phase, in phase 5, but also in the early phases. Here, for example, also in phase 1. So more investigation will be necessary to determine the specific forms associated with this decoration and the chronological evolution. We also found a few painted sherds, so some bowls with strips of alternated triangles, so with a black, white, or red, black triangles. And this kind of pottery was already noticed by former excavators, is considered also to be local, and parallels are known, especially from Leha in the United Emirates, coming from well-dated context, dated to the 1st, 2nd century AD. And this fits also well with our own sequence, stratigraphy. We also found a group of fine, deep conical bowls, very thin-walled, with still the similar reddish and sandy fabric. And this type of balls have sometimes been compared with the Nabatean fineware productions from southern Jordan. And definitely this hypothesis must be abandoned because they are very different from the Nabatean production. In particular, the base of the ball is completely different. We have here a kind of very small flat cut base, and it would be totally different on Nabatean balls. It would be larger and usually ring base. So these balls are also most probably local productions, and there seems to be also later. Then I will say a few words about the imports. Among the imported productions, we found many fragments of green glazed ware, sometimes also called Parthian ware. This ware is characterized by its fine and pale yellowish greenish fabric covered on both surfaces by a green alkaline glaze. Very often the glaze is extremely damaged. So I don't know if you see well the pictures, but you have to imagine that these shirts were originally entirely green. And sometimes the glaze is even completely gone, and you can only guess that the pottery was glazed because of the surface, which is a bit whitish and sometimes a bit iridescent. This green glaze was used mainly for service vessels. So we have plates, bowls, small jars like table amphoras. And this pottery is very common in southern Mesopotamia, where it was most probably produced. So it was widely diffused in the Gulf area and even beyond. Some sherds have been found as far as in southern India or Sri Lanka. And on the Arabian Peninsula, we found, for example, quite a lot in Madain Saleh. Another category of pottery which reflects strong links with the Mesopotamian area is a group of common unglazed jars, which are usually bitumen coated on the interior. They have a fabric similar to the glazed pottery, but the difference is that they have a lot of vegetal temper in addition. And the bitumen coating suggests that these jars contained a liquid. They are also very common in the whole Gulf area, and we even found one sherd with an inscription. Don't know if you can guess it, but it seems to be a Greek inscription. Unfortunately, it's too damaged to be readable, but of course we hope now, we expect to find more of these inscribed sherds, jars. One of the issues with these bitumen-coated jars is their link with the so-called, what we call the Torpedo Jars, which are well known, but for the later periods in the Gulf, and have a similar characteristic but different profiles. Okay, so this is a picture of the typical torpedo jars from a later context somewhere else in the Gulf. Also among the imports, I have to mention a few shirts with a fine pinkish fabric and a thick and sometimes a slightly burnished red slip. And this type of pottery corresponds probably to the so-called Indian red polished ware, which is also quite common in the Gulf area. We found some in Emirates, in Oman. And if this identification is confirmed, it would indicate contacts with northwestern India, and especially with the Gujarat region where it was produced. So to sum up about the trade networks between the 1st and the 4th century AD, the pottery indicates first strong links between Taj and the southern Mesopotamian area, but also probable contacts and exchanges with the western Indian Ocean. Lastly, I have to mention another kind of import, the Mediterranean productions, which are also represented, but they don't come from Trench 1, they come from another area, from the area of Tel Zaire, which is the rich tumulus, the rich tomb which was excavated in 1998 by the ACTH. And we noticed when we visited Tel Zaire that the tumulus was full of sherds, and so this Mediterranean sherd that we found, they don't come from the tomb chamber, but they come from the tumulus itself. It seems that this tumulus was built with a former dump dating of an earlier period. And these Mediterranean imports are fragments of Aegean glazed ware and Hellenistic amphoraes, and they can be dated really to the Hellenistic period, to the 3rd, 2nd century BC. It's interesting because it seems that this Mediterranean production stopped to reach Taj after the Hellenistic period, and they must have reached Taj through Mesopotamia, when this region was under the Greek Seleucid rulers, and after the Parthian takeover of the area, contacts with the Mediterranean seems to have stopped. But of course, it's a preliminary result. It has to be checked. So I will conclude with a few research perspectives. So first, we have to build a complete typochronology of the local production from the Hellenistic to the Parthian early Sassanid period now. We also have to study extremely carefully the pottery kiln productions. We will have to make some chemical identifications in order to characterize the different production groups. And we also have to continue the research regarding the evolution of trade networks and possible cultural transfer. So first via the maritime roads through the Gulf, towards Mesopotamia and the Indian Ocean, and on the other side through caravan roads, especially towards northwestern Arabia and most probably southern Arabia. All this data will allow us to better understand the general history of the site and its economical and political relationship with the surrounding regions, especially with southern Mesopotamian area. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Caroline. Now the floor is for Dr. Marta Lusaini. I'm sorry if my pronunciation is not okay. And her paper is entitled Current Issues in the Archaeology of Arabia, a View from the Northwest. Now you can give your talk.
Thank you. Can you have the PowerPoint? Could you have this sketched out PowerPoints? Because otherwise it's cut. So thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, in the last decade, the pace of field archaeological research has picked up exponentially in Saudi Arabia. For this, of course, we have to thank the far-sighted policy of the Saudi Commission for Tourism and National Heritage and its president, His Royal Highness Prince Sultan bin Salman bin Abdulaziz. In this lecture, I would like to review the major issues in current archaeology of the Arabian Peninsula, but special attention will focus on the large oasis in the northwest. I will base my assessment on the case study of Korayam, a joint project of the University of Vienna and the Saudi Commission for Tourism and National Heritage, compared with the latest data from Taima, Khuraiba Dedan, Medain Saleh, in the Al-Ula oasis. It shows how new research is pushing us to radically modify not only single evidence, but our entire conception of this area. I will focus on three specific aspects: the genesis and formation of so-called urban oases, the earliest metallurgic production, and transformations in pottery manufacture during the second millennium BCE. From a picture of this area as an impenetrable desert region where Mesopotamian kings first ventured during the full Iron Age, with camels and well-structured armies, or at the earliest, where major foreign Near Eastern power players such as Egypt induced settlement formation during the late 2nd millennium BCE, to one of a region where oasis cultivation and permanent settlement thrived well before the domestication of the dromedary, already during the late early Bronze Age at the latest. So to the genesis and formation and functioning of large oases. Let us look at what we know about the genesis of the site where our research is centered, Kuraya, in the province of Tabuk. For its localization and the presence in the region of what was known in Islamic times as Midian and already before in the classical period, it was identified as with the capital of the kingdom of the Midianites, a people mentioned in the Old Testament. 2nd millennium pottery found on its surface was called Midianite. And because of a bias against non-settled communities in the past, it was inconceivable that the local population may be at the origin and of the formation of such huge settlements enclosed by kilometers of high stone walls with towers encompassing several hundred hectares in extension. Because the so-called Midianite pottery showed single similarities with some Egyptian productions, it was believed that the settlement had formed during the late 2nd millennium BCE under strong influence, if not outright colonization, of the Egyptian kingdom itself. However, this is not what latest research seems to point to. So let's start from the beginning. The discovery in the 2015 campaign of a flint bowlet that is best compared with late PPNB, so pre-pottery Neolithic specimens attested throughout the Levant, has confirmed past findings of Neolithic material on the site. So when did the permanent settlement in the oasis first start? In fact, Kuraya should be best described as a human-made oasis, not a natural one, since no open water, near-surface groundwater, nor active spring was or is available in or near the site. Investigation of its environmental conditions are being carried out in order to gain a better understanding of the subsistence strategies that enabled a permanent settlement on the site. Through the GIS mapping of the geomorphology and water management structure, we developed the working hypothesis that a dam, here in red, circa 2 kilometers south of the ruins upstream along the Wadi Gubai, controlled the flow of surface water harvested for the oasis. Moreover, the so-called Roman site, an over 10 hectares large water collection and redistribution facility made of waterproof basins and several outlets, was located in a central position in the fields. Several water installations and canals, which we were able to map during the 2016 campaign, seemingly form a system with the Roman site. These observations allowed the hypothesis that in the Nabatean or Roman period, a large-scale reorganization and systematization of the entire water supply of the site was undertaken. We have sampled the Wadi Gubai Dam area and the breaches in the city wall that let water to and drainage from the Roman site out of the settlement and one canal area. The samples will be dated through optically stimulated luminescence at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna. So while we still do not have a date for the time in which major water management systematization made the oasis habitable permanently, what appeared clearly from our first surveys, however, is that extensive agricultural fields must have been under cultivation in Kuraya already during the Bronze Age. Moreover, the presence on site of a large olive tree trunk dating to the final centuries of the 3rd millennium Cal BCE is a first indication that the oasis was settled already in the late early Bronze Age, and that at this time olive tree cultivation was one of the farming strategies adopted on the site. Therefore, our data points to the existence of farming on the oasis of Kuraya 1,000 years before we thought that the city started to exist. Evidence of early oasis cultivation tallies well with the latest results from Teima that indicate an even more ancient start of agriculture in the settlement at the fringes of the Nafud Desert. But another confirmation of the ancient date of the oasis of Kuraya is given by our research on metallurgy. In 2008, the Teima team found on the surface of Kuraya's rock plateau a sandstone fragment with molten slag and has shown that it is arsenic copper stemming not from the expected mines in the Jordan Valley, but more likely from the Arabian Shield or possibly Oman. In 2016, we followed up on this surface find and opened an excavation area in Area M. It is located inside the round tower that joins the northern to the southern wall of the eastern wall on the rock plateau. Already in the upper most fill deposits inside the tower, we found several kilos of sandstone fragments with a coating of copper slag, possible copper ore, copper slag, copper prills, over 1 kilo of charcoal fuel, a small flat perforated copper disc, and 10 fragmentary crucibles that you see on the upper right. A C14 date clearly indicates that this metal production took place in Kuraya already at the end of the early Bronze Age. At the same time, the olive trees were cultivated. These findings suggest that long before any supposed contact with foreign powers such as Egypt, Kuraya was a metal production center relying on local, or at least non-Levantine, mineral sources. This data points to the formation of so-called urban oases as an endogenous, as opposed to an exogenous phenomenon, and one initiated earlier than previously thought, and as related to the entire peninsula, not only to the southern Levant. We are well aware that this is but a punctual evidence. However, here it is important to show that metallurgy clearly illustrates that Kuraya was part of a network of routes for raw material supply that is more complex than previously thought and more diversified than the sole observation of pottery seems to suggest. A network that was not exclusively oriented to the Levant in the north and Egypt in the west, but clearly comprised also regions to the south and east of the oasis. And thus we reach the third and last key issue I would like to discuss today, and that is transformation in pottery manufactured during the second millennium BCE. One of the most pressing issues in our first campaigns was clarifying the date of the major occupation phase in Kuraya and the chronology, typology, and chaîne opératoire of production of pottery formerly known as Midianite and now called standard Kuraya painted ware. We therefore opened an excavation, Area A, located on a small mound heavily covered by the black and overfired remains of pottery and slag. Here we have excavated the fire chamber of a double chamber pottery kiln that was surely built, reshaped, and used over at least 3 successive phases. Since we have found slag, clinkers, wasted, unfired, and regular pottery together with large quantities of fuel and possibly sand temper, there are no doubts about the function of this kiln as installation for firing standard Kuraya pottery ware. Our pottery findings amount to the most comprehensive assemblage of standard Kuraya pottery ware ever to be documented, very often with the typical painted decoration on the vessel's inside and out. Standard Kuraya painted ware painted motifs may be monochrome, bichrome, and at times polychrome, and range from the geometrical to the figurative. The latter include wild animals, among them lions and ibexes, or domesticated ones such as ram, horse, and apparently also a dromedary. C14 dates point to the 16th to 15th century BCE as the period in which the kiln operated. They are supported by the fact that the dates from burial activities in the kiln after the dismissal, so these are these are the dates for the dismissal of the kiln, are decidedly younger than those for its activity phase, and here. And the red ones from the graves containing the earlier red burnished pottery are, as expected, older. Looking at the older, also locally produced barbotine pottery, and analysis of the earlier motifs, as well as finds of clearly barbotine to standard Kuraya painted ware transitional pieces and overfired slag of barbotine pottery in both areas A and B, strongly support an interpretation of the development of the standard Kuraya painted ware as a homegrown phenomenon. As a recent distribution map summarizes, sizable quantities of standard Kuraya painted ware were distributed in a radius of circa 300 to 400 kilometers from Kuraya in all cardinal directions, northwards up to Amman and Gezer, southwards to Al-Ula, eastwards to Teima, and to the southwest to Ainuna and Tel el-Jul and Tel al-Farah, and up to Tel Kudirat in the Sinai. Our analysis also proved that potters in North Arabia in general, and in Kuraya in particular, must have been acquainted to bichrome motifs that were known and spreading in the neighboring Eastern Mediterranean at the turn from the Middle to the Late Bronze Age. Manufactures such as Cypriot and Levantine bichrome wares, here juxtaposed to standard Kuraya painted ware, or Jordanian chocolate on white, and Cypriot white slip 1 pottery. All these productions emerge at the turn from the final part of the Middle Bronze Age to the beginning of the Late Bronze Age, roughly around the 16th century Cal BCE, just like in Kuraya. And even if we do have evidence of locally produced painted pottery that looked at Egyptian faience prototypes and pottery shapes for inspiration, in the first North Arabian industrial production of bichrome painted pottery, we find proof of a completely indigenous, homegrown development of the ceramic manufacture, not induced by outer major political powers. Being acquainted with the above discussed Mediterranean, including Egyptian pottery groups, meant that the indigenous impulse for manufacturing standard Kuraya painted ware did not develop in complete isolation. In all these comparable manufactures of bichrome painted pottery emerging at the end of the Middle to beginning of the Late Bronze Age in Cyprus and the Southern Levant, the stylistic shift is accompanied and sustained by the process of introducing a systematic use of the potter's wheel. And since ethnoarchaeological work has shown that, and I quote Gosselin, manufacturing technique is the most deeply internalized aspect of production, resistant to change and embedded in social identity, end of quote, then we need to clearly define the modalities and extent of the spreading of this innovation. In conclusion, our new discoveries in Kuraya tell us that the formation process of the human-made oasis started much earlier than the late second millennium as believed until recently. Since at a very early stage we already see some local melting or smelting of copper alloys, metallurgical exploitation may be at the origin of the very genesis of the site as a permanent settlement with monumental walls. This discovery now prompts us to look for copper ores and mines in the surrounding region where the original mineral may have been extracted. While during the early Middle Bronze Age, connections with a wide-ranging area from Yemen to Megiddo testified to the contacts that brought similar weapons in our Barbotine pottery burials, the upgrading of connections clearly takes place during the early Late Bronze Age with the production of a bichrome, wheel-made painted pottery that echoes contemporary productions throughout the Eastern Mediterranean. So it is through the scrutiny of the mechanisms of transmission of techniques of pottery manufacture and size and scope of this production that we will finally establish its role in the economy of second millennium North Arabian oases and their connections to the Levantine and wider world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Marta. Now the turn is for Dr. Zinitbu Fima, and his speech is about the Roman fort at Madain Saleh. You are welcome to deliver your speech.
Ancient Hegra, Madain Saleh, is well known for its Nabatean rock tombs, but it also includes a large settlement currently excavated by the Saudi-French mission. Between the first century BC and 106 AD, Hegra was an important Nabatean political center and a commercial emporium. Following the annexation of Nabatea by Roman Emperor Trajan in AD 106, Hegra and the northern Hijaz were incorporated into Roman province of Arabia. The presence of Roman military in Hegra is epigraphically attested at the site and in the environs of Madain Saleh. This presentation concerns the Roman fort located in the southern part of the town. The epigraphic record indicates that the Roman military presence in Hegra was not ephemeral, and so the Roman soldiers should have been based in some kind of urban military camp or cantonment. Area 34 is the best candidate for such location. It is situated in the southern part of the city, directly west of Hill B. This hill was incorporated in the town rampart circuit, and its top once held a stone-built citadel, which was in a close functional relationship with the structures in Area 34. The fieldwork supplemented by the aerial imagery revealed traces of numerous stone foundations and walls and arranged in the long parallel and subdivided rows. This architectural complex appears to as a rough quadrangle consisting of series of rooms surrounding an irregular central courtyard. The entire complex stretches east-west for 85 meters and south-north about 65 meters, so it is little over than half a hectare in size. There is a marked difference between the eastern part of the quadrangle in the central and the central western parts. So the eastern part and then the rest of it. As primarily reflected in the construction and manner of the rampart and the overall orientation of walls and structures in these parts. These differences are not accidental, and the apparent lack of conformity between the eastern and the central western parts resulted from the fact that these were constructed in different time periods, Nabatean and Roman period, and represented by the Nabatean rampart, as you could see here, and the Roman rampart, which occupies the larger part of the circuit. Trench A, located here, was opened in the southeastern part of the area in order to clarify the dating of the Nabatean rampart, where it merges with the slope of Hill B. The lowermost deposits into the trench were dated to the 1st century AD and are contemporary with the Nabatean rampart. The main deposits were dated to the late 1st century AD, 2nd century AD, and probably relate to the creation of the architectural complex associated with the Roman rampart. During that time, room 1 was the open space used for milling, food producing, and cooking. Later, this room became a convenient place of disposal of debris. The occupation in room 1 did not continue beyond the 3rd century AD. Directly south of the Nabatean rampart are the remains of the combined mud brick stone fortification reinforcement. located here. And this reinforcement consists of the rampart itself, the empty space which was filled up with debris, the casemate, the front mud brick wall with the stone revetment, the cross walls, and then a massive layer of glacis. The Roman rampart begins with its direction changed into west-northwest, southeast-west, southeast-south. So the Roman rampart as represented by this thick black line. It is at least 1.4 meters wide and constructed of well-dressed stones in regular coursing. This rampart continues for 65 meters until it reaches the southwestern corner. Whereas 23 meters to the east of the corner, there is a small gate, 2.1 meters wide, with the monolithic threshold. The gate is flanked by two solid rectangular towers. The foundation deposits of the gate flanking towers in Hegra yielded late 1st century AD, early 2nd century AD pottery. Trench B opened directly west of the gate, revealed the stone soil build-up to level the bedrock and the flagstone floor, as well as the walls forming the rooms. The occupation on the floor was dated to the 2nd, early 3rd century AD, after which most of the flagstones were removed and the gate was blocked by inserting two stone basins and stacks of flagstones. And a small buttress was built outside in the front of the blocking. So the original gate is here and the buttress built in the front of the blocking. The subsequent occupation of on the beaten earth floor of the room and dated to the later 3rd century was probably still military. But the uppermost 4th century strata may represent the post-military occupation, probably the civilian. 33 meters west of the gate, there is a southwestern corner of the fort marked by the corner tower, 4.1 by 4.1 meters, fully integrated in the corner formed by the southern and western walls. While this stony plateau on which the fort is located ends in the area of the southwestern tower, sharply dropping down into the surrounding sandy area, another wall continues beyond the tower on the same line as the Roman rampart to the place where another square tower was excavated. So here's the corner tower of the fort, the continuation of the same line of the wall and the westernmost tower. Additionally, the Roman rampart is abutted by 9 small buttresses, which are small, about 1.4 meters square, and whereas they were not excavated, they appear to be solid. Although located in the eastern part of the fort and largely following the orientation of the Nabatean rampart, the eastern wing of rooms, the rooms from 1 to 10, does not belong to the Nabatean occupation, as it bears indelible impression of the Roman military barracks. The wing followed the orientation of pre-existent structures incorporated into the Roman fort. The wing features units which are 2 room deep, resembling contubernia in the Roman forts, contubernium being the smallest unit of the Roman army, consisting of 8 soldiers. So what we have here is what resembles so-called Davison type B, the rectangular front arma, front room, and the rear room, papilio, of the roughly same dimensions. The rooms in Hegra are 3.2 by 5 meters, so about 12 by 14 Roman feet, and thus very close to the typical establishments in the Roman legionary fortresses. Now a few words about the finds. Among the ceramics, the sherds of the 2nd to 3rd century AD were predominant. However, the 1st century AD, BC, as well as the 4th century AD types were also present. More than 80 coins were found, many of them Romans. Among bronze objects, many were presumably parts of the specialized military horse harness. Notable is the open-work baldric fastener of the sword belt, which finds very good parallels with one found in Dura Europos and dated to the 2nd, 3rd century AD. Several bronze plates feature series of punched holes, perhaps elements of Lorica squamata, but since none have patterned holes for both vertical and horizontal stitching, they might perhaps be local repairs, replacements, or segments of the horse armor. Other objects included a female statuette, a Roman fibula, the oversized finger of a statue, and the hind leg of the bold statuette, often found in the Roman military context. Of the greater interest is the deposit of the bronze figurines found under the overturned bottom of the broken stone basin in room 12, in room 11. The finds included the figurine of domestic male goat, an elongated object that resembles a scepter, a male figurine, probably Dionysus, maybe Hercules, and a figurine which appears to represent Greek Egyptian deity Harpocrates. If the dating of this deposit is correct, the end of the 3rd, beginning of the 4th century AD, it represents a ritual burial of sacred artifacts, probably associated with some kind of ceremony, either at the end of the military occupation or at the beginning of the civilian occupation in the fort. The Area 34 also provided large number of broken basalt millstones from large Pompeian type hourglass mills, as well as the small cairns and rotary hand mills, all very well evidenced in the Roman military context. The zooarchaeological evidence confirms the unique nature and pattern of habitation in the fort, featuring the preference in consumption of large mammals, cattle, camel, donkey, and horse. Sheep and goat, while more common elsewhere in Hegra, were also present, although mostly adults and with the extremities not removed. Apparently, the preference was for the maximum volume of meat. Butchering was done outside of the camps, and the carcasses brought to the fort. All of these elements well reflecting the policy of the wholesale purchase, butchering, and redistribution in the context governed by the military commissariat. Now the conclusions. Area 34 occupies a superb tactical location in Hegra, while the citadel on the top of Hill B provides an excellent vantage observation point with all-round visibility, particularly suitable in monitoring town of Hegra. The fort is perfectly located for an occupation army to oversee the activities in the conquered city and to defend it from the external foe. During the Nabatean period, the southeastern rampart and some walls surrounding the room 1 were constructed. Possibly this rampart never enclosed the entire area or was replaced later on by the Roman fortifications. Soon after the annexation, the Romans established the garrison in Hegra. The fort, which is dated to the early to mid-2nd century AD, is probably, after the fort in Humeima in southern Jordan, one of the earliest Roman military structures in Arabia. The fort in Humeima provides the closest temporal and structural parallels to the Hegra fort. For example, quite notable is the fact that the use of the modular system based on the Roman feed is well attested in Humeima, is also well evidenced in Hegra, which clearly implies the planning by the Roman engineers. As opposed to the traditional layout of Roman forts, the eastern part of the fort of Hegra was irregular because the integration of Hill B with the citadel and the Nabatean rampart offered definite tactical advantages. The central and western parts of the plateau allowed for the imposition of more regular, more typical Roman quadrangular plan. Sometime in the 2nd century, the sector of the fort featuring the Nabatean rampart, so in this place, was reinforced by the addition of casemates and the stone revetment and the glacis. This major reinforcement may appear excessive, but probably was meant to rather impress the visitors coming to Hegra. Incidentally, this reinforcement might not have been a sort of isolated episode, but rather a part of the overall bolstering of Hegra's fortifications in the 2nd century. After all, the towers which are along the town wall circuit are later in date than the Nabatean curtain wall. Since the distance between the towers is about 35 meters, undoubtedly 120 Roman feet were meant, equaling 1 actus, which is again a standard module in use by the Roman engineers. By the middle to late 3rd century, the gate in the southern wall was blocked and the small buttresses were constructed. The military occupation continued, but the fort was probably abandoned by the end of the 3rd, beginning of the 4th century, after which the civilians of the town of Hegra most probably moved in to be protected by the steel standing walls. The Saudi-French excavations in Area 34 produced significant information on the chronology and building techniques of the Roman fort in Hegra. Additionally, the wealth of material culture associated with the inhabitants of the fort included numerous also imported ceramics, uncommon bronze objects, large number of coins, and 1 Latin inscription. The fort in Hegra is a unique monument of this kind in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and it confirms the significant Roman presence in the northwest part of the Arabian Peninsula. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pima. The last speaker is Dr. Carol Jonwick, and her contribution is entitled "When Lukikuma Becomes Anyuna, a Shift from International Importation to Regional Trade Center." Now you can approach the stage and address the audience.
It's okay? Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 3 years, I have learned that Lukikuma is a very catchy term, which is bringing attention. So, to be honest with you, I'm using it very cynically now. Because in this paper, I'm going to focus not on the name of Lukikuma and the location of the place, but rather on the nature and function of our site. However, since I'm using this name, some arguments for placing Lukikuma here in Ainuna must be shown. So there is a couple of arguments, of course, based mainly on the interpretation of the only text which describes Lukikuma, which is Periplus of Maris Erythraei. But we also combined it with the topographical studies and landscape studies. So I'll now, since we are well past our time, I will show you only 2 basic concepts. The first one, the most solid, of course. The first one is direct connection with Petra, which is mentioned in Periplus, which corresponds to this description, as you can see here on the screen. And also topography of the sites itself, which is also described in Periplus as having 3 main elements, which are port, emporion, and frurion. So connection with the Transjordanian markets, with Petra as the main one in times of Periplus, is partly well known or very easy to reconstruct, however, on the basis of the a little bit later evidence. So this route uses relatively comfortable topography through Wadi Fal, from Ainuna north to Al-Bad, and then through Wadi Fal, through 2 sites which are mentioned in later Arabic sources, Al-Sharaf and Al-Hakul, and then to Aqaba. And then, of course, the northern part is very well known Here I have marked Via Nova, but of course it was very well-known route even before Traian. Whole route is about 300 kilometers, which, according to Eivind Sæland, takes something around 8 days of relatively safe and comfortable journey, which is very important when we compare it with other route simply through the Gulf of Aqaba. But this is different story. In regard of topography, matching the description, we have all three elements of Leuke from Periplus here in Ainuna. Port in Khureyba, which is still in use, and we have surveyed it only very, very briefly. Then a site called Lower Ainuna, which can be an emporion, in our opinion, and the fortified town of Upper Ainuna, which is simply Frurion, a fortified settlement. All three elements are connected with each other, both structurally like Upper and Lower Ainuna, or functionally with Khureyba port. And to our opinion, all this cluster served as an international trade station. Our work is focused on the Lower Ainuna, as the project is dedicated to the examination of the infrastructure connected with trade. And it seemed that Lower Ainuna ruins have clear connection with such an activity. So we have distinguished at least 6 different structures here in Lower Ainuna. We call them very tentatively Hans. And there is also one structure, a tower here, which is, of course, still unexcavated. 2 structures can be attributed to the period of 1st to 4th century AD, when international trade with India and Southern Arabia flourished. The first is Han number 2, visible here, dated by C14 sample to the end of the 1st and the beginning of the 2nd century AD. It consists, as you can see, of a row of small, around 2 by 3 meter rooms. One of them were excavated by us, and it was found completely empty. Additionally, this structure is the only one which connects the Wadi Ainuna bed, with the site which lies on a bank. And it seems that we have found something like, we call it, of course, gate, but, well, an entrance to the site, which is located here, and it was flanked by the one big room, which you can see here on the sections and on this picture, and also on this plan. The second structure is called Han number 5. It's located here. Where is the arrow? Well, here. And its function is, even less known. You must be aware that the project is relatively new. We have started in 2015, so not all of these structures are excavated, only through some sondages. Considering Han number 5, the last season clearly showed that we are only now touching this earlier phase of the occupation of the site, as the Han number 5 seems to be connected with the ruins of some structure destroyed or abandoned in the late 4th century, according to our C14 samples, which are marked here in red. So it seems that the whole cluster of these sites, like Han number 5, Han number 2, and this possible Han number 6, are much bigger than we have previously expected. So now we are quickly moving and stepping into a period of the 5th and 6th century, which we do not know nothing about, actually. This is the period which seems to be, the Lower Ainuna seems to be abandoned, or at least significantly decayed, as our archaeological material does not indicate any larger occupation or activity. So we have a gap. Maybe it comes from the state of research, maybe it was just like this. However, situation changes. It seems that it changes in the 7th century, when we think the Han number 1, the best preserved structure on the site, has been constructed or reconstructed. We have two options. However, it seems to represent different function than simply a trade station. First of all of the rooms excavated in the northern row, also here in the southern, were full of very domestic, it's maybe not a good word, but there were some domestic features there which were not present in Han number 2 and Han number 5. Simply grinders like this, small basins. This one actually is located here in the corner, but we have found also one here in the a lot of hearths. These two actually are located here in some kind of industrial production area of the Han. Additionally, the problem with Han number 1 is, maybe not a problem, it's just an issue, is that it was constructed on a leveled terrain with the use, probably with the use of the earlier construction material. So basically, constructors of this Han, they raised the ruins on the spot, and they used the same rough stones to build a new building. We have some parallels for this Han number 1 all across the Arabia as well as in Transjordan. Here you have some of them. Sites in Dokra, Dalkira, Hamra, this one is chosen for the plan of the site, Ashiyat, are both from the late Roman periods, like Dokra and Dalkira probably, and early Islamic period like Al-Hamra, which lays on the Darba Zubayda. And as you can see, for example, at Dokra and Dalkira, we have almost the same buildings. Although they are not, well, Dalkira is in Wadi Sihan, so it's on the path. However, according to the excavators, they are local oriented buildings. Al-Jimal, of course, is perhaps the best example, and also the best example to discuss the function of the building with the large central courtyards. We can be very easily interpreted as a caravanserai, but here, for example, excavators are saying that those buildings are rather residential compounds for families than caravanserais. Of course, it's not contradictory. I mean, the central courtyard building can be used both for trade, as a local market, and as a domestic. Here we are getting to another important issue which I would like to address here, which is somehow overshadowed by the name of Lelkekome and the notion of the international trade. It's an issue of local indigenous community, people living in this place originally. And perhaps it is best exemplified by the existence of Upper Ainuna, which dominates the other parts of this whole archaeological cluster. Upper Ainuna is located on the top of the plateau above the Wadi Ainuna. It's around 150 by 200 meters, and it's naturally fortified, in addition to obviously some kind of fortification system. This site has not been excavated yet. We've done only some very brief survey, collected pottery from the surface. We have also numbered some rooms and divided it into the areas and districts. Right. Here you have some parallels to be studied, of course, because this research on the Upper Ainuna is its infancy. But just to show you that there are some connections, architectural connections. We have something from the south, like Kani and Hibet al-Hussein in central Yemen, and Madinat al-Hashan here. All sides, Kani with the citadel dominating the lower part, connected with trade. Almost exactly like, of course, topographically it's a little bit different. And of course something from Transjordan, from the Negev Desert, which is later, as you can see, the grid and the plan is very much the same. Perhaps we should focus on the issue of the regional position of Ainuna as an indigenous culture, indigenous community of the Northwest Arabia. Its position both as a production center and a local marketplace, with an economy based on possibly mining. I'm just showing you the picture because you're not really sure about the chronology of the mining activities there. But most, probably even more importantly, an oasis economy based on the oasis agriculture. So you can see how the Wadi Ainuna looks today. Maybe not exactly that today. There are some palm groves inside the wadi. But here you have a picture taken probably in the 50s or 60s, which shows you that a little bit of maintenance of the water installations inside the wadi would provide a picture like this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. John Wilkins. Now the floor is open for discussion, questions, and commentaries. The time allocated is only 15 minutes. And anyone who intends to participate in commentaries and questions should raise up his hand and give us his name. Also, I expect the presenter to follow these questions and commentaries and give their answers accordingly at the end of the session. Your name? Okay. Your name? No. Questions and commentaries? For the presenter, Dr. Ahmed? Dr. Rabban. Dr. Ali. Yes? Garden? Dr. Garden. موجود Yeah, now the first chance is for Dr. Maha.
My name is Maha Sinan. My question is to Dr. Marta. Regarding your question yesterday, after seeing the drawings on the pottery, I want your comment on what do you think that the influence of the religious aspect, especially that we've seen, in my opinion, evidence of Southern religion thought. And also following up in Taj with Dr. Jeremy and Dr. Caroline, have you seen in the pottery there in Taj anything related to Southern Arabian religion or culture, or not only Hellenistic? And in the Roman fort, Dr. Tiema, are these pictures or artifacts published regarding the Hellenistic, artifacts? And have you also seen there, or anything related to Southern religion in those two sites? Is my question clear? No?
Answers will be at the very end of the session. Now the chance is for Dr. Ahmed Abu Qasim, University of Hail. The answer of the question will be at the end of the afterwards, not now.
We faced so many problems when we try to find the origin of some ceramics, but we made it probably that it belongs to thatch. Now when I noted your pottery, I became sure that it had connection with thatch. It was contemporary part with thatch. So your study will help future studies when people carry out more research on. Did you find ceramic Nabatean pottery? Did you find Nabatean pottery as such? That is the question. The second question for Leila concerns the study at Medan Saleh. We were at Ladan forever. Ladan, I believe, came to an end around the 3rd century BC. People believe that the population moved to Medan Saleh. But now, after your presentation, I come to conclusion that they were partly contemporary, particularly during the early period, what you call Nabatean.
Yeah. Now the chance will be given to Dr. Ali Hamid Ghadban, Professor Ali Hamid Ghadban. Now the chances for you for question or commentaries.
So Khabir, Hamid is an ancient name, It's the first. Yes, I would like to express my admiration regarding the work done in Hijr, Medan Saleh. But after 15 seasons of excavation, we still talking about Nabatean, Roman, and recently Geomagnetic. But in other sites in the area, Taima, for example, we have remains, we have layers from the 3rd millennium, 2800, with ceramics. And also in Uraya, we talk about Bronze Age, late Bronze Age, and even Iron Age. When we can find in Hijra, we are convinced that there is Bronze Age occupation. Maybe we can find minor trace, even in Madain Saleh. You found some remains in the hill, near the site. The same ceramic found in Madain Saleh was found also in Taifa. Is this goal in top of your priority in Madain Saleh team? And when we can say that we have named it Bronze Age, for us it will be Tammurian occupation, which is mentioned in our written historical sources. We are convinced that people was living in that site in the third millennium. But the archaeologists must look for this and take this in consideration. Thank you.
Now the chance is for Dr. Pat. The chance for you.
My question for Dr. Roman. You mentioned in your talk, I think, the excavation based on aerial photos, geophysical survey, especially magnetic. But unfortunately, you did spotlight about the kind of survey, magnetic survey. Did you use the radiometer, magnetometer, and the type of aerial photographs? Otherwise, it is too difficult to trace the complex world inside Saturn. The last question for me, the magnetic map has low resolution. So, how you base your results on this low resolution? Thank you.
Yeah, at the very end of the session, you will be given a chance to answer any question or to comment on it. The last chance will be given to Dr. Konda. You already raised up your hand and gave us your name.
My remark is for Jerome. You have shown this outer fortification gate and mentioned some South Arabic parallels. Now, there is a very good parallel to Hajj, which was with them. All four gates are provided protection. The outer wall with a passive and a lateral entrance. The two of them are excavated and published sooner.
The question for whom? For you. Now we'll give Dr. Martha and Dr. Caroline a chance to answer the question posed by Dr. Maha.
Yes.
Yeah. You can
Yes.
begin.
Okay. So thank you very much for the question. So the question of evidence of religion in the pottery, or influences of religion is a very, it's a beautiful question. It's a very difficult question. I can tell you that we not only have all these painted motifs on the ibex and the lion, but we also have two beautiful heads of a ram, which are also made of pottery, and they are also partially painted. So the big question is, we are in the second millennium BC. We are, let's say, in the 16th, 15th century BC. I am sure that they had a religion, but I am not sure, I have no idea which religion they had. So is my ibex, my ram, my lion a god or a goddess or not? I have no evidence for knowing whether this is just a lion or it's a representation of a deity. This is the big issue, because we don't have any contemporary sources from this area. We have contemporary sources, of course, from Mesopotamia and the Levant, but I do not think that, I think we have to be, especially on these issues, I think we have to be particularly careful, and we cannot export and say whatever. For example, if I see a lion, lion is well attested since the 3rd millennium as being the animal that represents Ishtar. But is the lion on our pots Ishtar? Well, I leave this to you. I would not trust and go that far and say that this is the case, but possibly, and our ram's heads, are they idols? Is this a ram as we know that the ram had a minutes. Okay. So it's a very I thank you for pointing this out to me, because as I said yesterday, we in the Bronze Age, it's true that we sort of tend to blend out religion because we don't have the strong evidence, we don't have the texts, but it's true that obviously there must have been a religion, I'm sure about this. And I just say one very short comment, even if it was not directed to me, to Dr. Ali, that I don't know what the situation in Medain Saleh is, but from the publication of Khuraiba, the pottery that we see, they have Barbotine pottery, so they must have layers of the Middle Bronze Age of the 2nd millennium. They have standard Khuraya painted ware, so they must, in Khuraiba at least, there must be, I don't know if layers, but they have the pottery at least of these periods.
Now I give the chance to Dr. Leila Norma and Dr. Hima to answer the questions posed by Dr. Ahmed Abul Qasim. Much more comments?
Okay, I just will answer the question of Dr. Maha. I think you asked me if we had some evidence of contacts with Southern Arabia, and okay, it was just the first campaign, so it's still it's still in progress. But up till now, we don't have any evidence in the pottery material of contacts with Southern Arabia, but we should find some. So it would make sense that we have some, that there was some contacts, but yeah, I couldn't see anything right now, not yet. So we'll see.
Now the chances for Dr. Hima and Dr. Leila to comment on.
Well, I will answer both questions at the same time. Yes, because it's linked. We were first arrived in Medain Saleh assuming that it was a Nabatean site, okay, with a 1st century AD occupation. Now, with all the work we've done, we have extended the occupation from the mid-1st millennium BC to the mid-1st millennium AD. So that's now 1,000 years, and a bit more than that. So it is true now that we have more or less the proof that there has been an overlap between Khuraiba and Medain Saleh, and that people did not move from one era to the other. Now, concerning Dr. Ali Ghaban's question, we do have the tumuli, which have been excavated by Wa'il Abu Azizi from the late Bronze Age, so turn of the 3rd to the 2nd millennium BC. The problem is that we do not have the settlement which goes with it. Of course, the settlement may be somewhere in Medain Saleh, in the area of the oasis of Al-Hijr, but we don't know where. In all the areas we have excavated which are within the settlement in the central plain where all the water resources are, we did not find any Bronze Age pottery, Bronze Age layers. But we reached the bedrock. So when we reach the bedrock, we can assume that we have gone to the end of what was the earliest occupation. Now, just to answer your last question, I will not say that finding the Bronze Age settlement is among my or the top priorities of the team, because it's actually looking for it would be, I think, possibly we would never find it. We have no idea where it could be, when what we can just go on doing is excavate in what I hope is a clever way of trying to find the best places to get results from the excavations.
We have to stick to the geomagnetic method of geophysics. Then concerning the aerial pictures, you were asking about the resolution. Actually, the resolution is very high because we obtain a resolution of 1 centimeter per pixel, which means that we can see every single stone in an area of 4 square kilometers around the site. So it's very, very precise, and it allows us to draw a very good map of the last architectural stratum of the ancient city. Thank you. And thank you for the parallel from Hatra. Thank you very much.
Now I declare the meeting is up. Thank you so much for your attendance, participation, participations which come up with fruitful discussions and outcomes. Thank you.